Shalom, greetings to everybody. This week's Parsha VaYishlach is a very special Parsha. On the surface, it tells the story of Yaakov coming home. He's been away for 22 years, and he meets with his brother. He's not sure what kind of meeting that's going to be. Will it be a meeting of love? Will it be a meeting of hate and war? During this process, he has a fight with a mysterious angel. And immediately afterwards, it seems to change the setting for the meeting with Esav. Not clear what this means. Then we have the very difficult story of his daughter Dinah getting raped and kidnapped by Shem, a king, a prince and a king in Israel. And the response of the brothers tricking them to having a Brit Milah. Afterwards, when they come and they say they want to marry them and they want to become one nation, the brothers say, well, can only be one nation if you have a bris, you circumcise yourselves. And then on the third day when they're hurting, brothers kill all the men of that nation. And the response of Yaakov is very negative. And again, it's not sure were they justified, were they not justified. On the surface, it sounds a horrific story. And then therefore, after Yaakov has a revelation, he builds a mizbeach, an altar to Hashem. Finally, the younger son, Binyamin, is born, the only son to be born in Israel. And his mother, Rachel, dies during childbirth. She calls him, as she's dying, Benoni, the son of my suffering. And the father calls him Binyamin, the son of my right hand, the son of my strength. And finally, we have a long, long list of the genealogy of Esav. Now, we could ask, who cares about Esav? And we seem to ask, who really cares about Esav? He's not part of the mainstream. He's not part of our people. And it details the generals and the kings and the general children. A lot of detail and a lot of confusion in the detail. To contradictions in the information we've heard earlier. Very, very strange portion. One of the principles that we have seen several times is that the more strange an event or portion appears in the Torah, the deeper it is. And the harder it is to understand, there's a deeper secret hidden there. And that's why it's hidden, because secrets are meant to be secrets. And if something is very deep, it's not meant to be exposed to everybody. Only people who are worthy and people who will take it seriously and not corrupt a deep idea in a superficial way. So let's try and understand what is Esav. And amongst the rabbis, there's two main approaches. One is a personal approach, and one is a general nationalistic approach. Both of them say that this has to represent, both approaches say this has to represent something more than this historical story of two brothers who are reuniting. Sure, that story was true and it happened, but we know that Hashem built the Torah, the world, the history, level on level. And the pshat, the simple things that happen in the Torah and in our lives, are a mirror image of the spiritual and the deeper ideas on many, many, many levels. So if we say that Esav, if we look at this on the personal level, then Yaakov is the good yetzer, the good inclination within us. And Esav is the evil inclination. The part of us that makes us do things that afterwards we're sorry about. Makes us do things that when we look back a day later, a year later, or maybe at the end of a lifetime, we're not so proud of them. But Yaakov is the tendency to put us to things that, these are the things we'd like them to say at us. And it's after 120 in our eulogies. And And this meeting between Esav and Yaakov is a meeting that's continuously going, but it happens especially just before Yaakov comes home. The more we grow, the more we come towards ourselves, the more challenged we are. And Hashem does that on purpose because He wants us to grow. He wants us to grow to the maximum that we can do. So the more we grow, the more we're capable, the more we're challenged. Almost like an athlete, right? Or somebody who does a high jump. If he's capable of jumping 2 meters, you won't offer him to jump 1.5 meters, but you won't offer him to jump 3 meters. You'll offer him to jump 2.1 meters. Each person, according to their spiritual fitness, they're challenged to achieve the maximum. And that's why in this meeting between the two inclinations, we have the fight that Yaakov has with an angel. An angel aren't creatures with wings that float around. The angels are the spiritual side of us. If you really want to be a good person, if you really want to achieve things in your life, the first stage is mind over matter. And when we say mind, we mean spiritual mind. What really drives a person is meaning. The fantastic book of Man's Search for Meaning of Frankl really sums it up in such a succinct way. If man has a meaning that has value, afterwards everything is easy. If man is just working, if a person is just working for the fun of it, just to have money to spend it and then make more money, he may do it for a year or 2 years, but looking back over a long period of life, he'll feel something's missing. But if a person has drive, a spiritual drive, and he knows he's doing good, he has purpose in this world, the older he gets, the more he grows, the more purpose he has. And that's why you find sometimes great people, great rabbis especially, they come to their peak, not at 40 or 50, but when they're 90 and beyond. A lot of people who live for the moment, they sort of see the peak of their life when they're 30. And then every birthday after 30 or 40 is not really a celebration. It becomes, I'm now on the way down. But it doesn't have to be like that. It can be a period of going up. And during this process of growing, we sometimes have these challenges that we don't know what to do. And this is the story of Dinah, right? The story of a foreign force takes the sexual inclination, takes it completely to a criminal level, rape and kidnapping, things that are unheard of, and things are probably equivalent to murder. And how do you deal with it? And we have this internal dilemma. Do you deal with it by force and fighting and eliminating? The approach of Shimon and Levi, the two sons that went out and eliminated and killed that whole tribe? Or do you try and win them over? And this is the approach of Yaakov, and Yaakov was angry with him. And I don't think there's one correct answer. I think there's pros and cons to each of the answers, and these have to be evaluated on an ongoing basis. And the tensions between the good inclination and the evil inclination is not just black and white, good and bad, but it's often the gray area that we want to do good, but we don't know if it's good, right? How many arguments have people have outside the shuls? Is it better to go into the shul and give the respect to the shul, or is it better to pray outside and ensure that we have an extra level of safety, an extra level of preventing the coronavirus? And I don't think there's one answer for every situation. And in each situation, often we're split between two choices. And finally, as we come home, as we get to our base, we have the last born who's born. We may have children before, But these children were missing something. What they were missing is that they weren't born in our hometown. They were born in Chutz La'aretz. They were born overseas. They were born out of Israel. The one son that is born in Israel is Binyamin. And he is the final strength. The son being born, if you look on a personal level, talks about our continuation, our eternity on a personal level. It talks about our children, right? But it also talks about our memory. And the two actually link together, because who remembers us more than our children and our grandchildren? Who, the lovely minhag of naming people after your parents, your grandparents, the Sephardim do it while they're still alive, the Ashkenazim do it after they die. It doesn't really matter. The idea of eternity, because that is the subconscious drive why people want to have children, it gives them eternity. And Masim Tovim, the good deeds, the things that we achieve in this world, are like children also, because we are remembered by what will be left behind, by what we achieved that will make the world a better place. And as a person grows older, it gets more difficult. There is physical suffering as you get older. Age is difficult. But there's two ways of looking at old age. You can look at old age as, when I started off, I'm in this world, this temporary world, with a body and a soul, and I have to have them working together, and I use the body as much as possible. And as I get older, the body gets a little bit weaker and a little bit weaker, because the soul is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, until I hit the ultimate 120 years, where I'm 100% soul and zero body. And that is the completion. According to this, that is the birth of Binyamin. Binyamin, this is Benjamin. This is my son, my continuity that's going to go on forever. Of course, you can view life differently. You can view life that there's a body, there's a soul, but I really enjoy the body. And as long as I can enjoy the body, it's everything in life. And when I start getting older, as we alluded to later, my life is starting to get less and less and less. And then I get miserable. And then when I get to the old age where Binyamin is about to be born, it's Benoni. It's the son of my suffering. And that is the dilemma of the two. And finally, the last section talks about Esav. All the negative sides of Esav. So you could look at it, you know what? You come to the end of your world, the end of your life, and you see all the negative aspects of your world, all the negative things that you left behind. Not the Ben Yamin, but the Esavs, the things that you're sorry about. And they also have an effect. And the person has to remember this during his whole life. All of this now has been a flow of taking Esav and Yaakov as examples of, within an individual person, two Yetzarim, the spiritual and the physical. But there's a completely different approach. And that approach has been used by a lot of rabbis, especially in our generation, but on a national level. And that is that we've been in Galut, we've been in diaspora after the glorious years we had during the time of the temples, not without difficulty, but we went to that very difficult diaspora with a lot of suffering, whether there was the pogroms, whether there was the Spanish Inquisition, whether there was the Holocaust, which seemed to be the pinnacle of it all, things that we can't even imagine. Sometimes when people talk about the difficulties of the corona, I wonder, where's the perspective? Yes, corona is difficult. There are challenges. People are sick, people are suffering, people are lonely. But compared to what we've been through in the last 2,000 years, I think corona is a picnic. Again, what is your level of perspective? And I'm not in any way downplaying the pain and the suffering that people are having during this period. And what happens towards the end of this period, we had the biggest blow that we had maybe ever, or at least in 2,000 years. And 1/3 of our nation was completely killed. And people living in the Holocaust, people went through that suffering day by day for years. It's unbelievable. Very often they lost hope. They lost hope not just for themselves, which you can understand, but they also lost hope for the Jewish people. They really thought that this Hitler may succeed, and there may be no future, God forbid, for the Jewish people. And perhaps the biggest miracle in the last 100 years has been what happened afterwards. That those same people who came out of that impossible situation were part of the pioneers of the State of Israel, which today is one of the strongest, most impressive countries in the world. And how did that happen? So the initial thought is that in spite of that suffering, in spite of the decimation of the Holocaust, we managed to recover. God gave us the strength, we gave us the strength, and the Jewish people formed again. But maybe the description of in spite of is actually not accurate. Maybe because of the suffering of the Holocaust, we had this build-up. We don't know why Hashem brought the Holocaust, and definitely on an individual level, nobody can say why this person died and that person died, especially so many, and children and young children. But we do know that for the first time in many, many hundreds of years, in the ghettos itself, the Jewish people found their strength. The Jewish people, through total desperation, after many years of holding in, finally fought against the Nazis, this massive Nazi army that had overtaken half of the world and looked like there was no stopping them, and managed to fight against and win against some of the strongest brigades in the German army. Unbelievable. And this strength, this inner strength, came from getting rid of all the comforts and all the securities that they had before. Very often we ask, should I do this? Should I not do this? Today in Israel, any country, should we attack Iran today or not attack Iran? And the more successful they are, the stronger you are, sometimes it can be more difficult to do because the consequence could be worse. If you have nothing to lose, the consequences are less, far less. And that's what happened in the Holocaust. But what happened as a result, it created the Jewish people, the Jewish people's courage, their strength. And that was the strength to do the impossible, to fight against 6 countries, outnumbered 6-1, 10-1, in people, in ammunition, in technology, in the War of Independence, in the 6-Day War, in the 73 War, Yom Kippur War, and to win all 3 wars. And this is hinted to as exactly what happens. Just before Yaakov is coming home, Yaakov is Israel, just before Israel, the children of Israel, the people of Israel coming home, there is a fight, there's a spiritual fight. This fight of desolation, of destruction, of the strife of construction, of building, of spirituality. The fight between Esav and Israel and Yaakov. And in that fight, the angel hurts Yaakov, and Yaakov is limping. But even though Yaakov is limping, he won the war. He defeated the angel. He spiritually defeated the negative forces. He almost lost. It wasn't a clear war. And then afterwards, he can come and meet Esav face to face, the physical Esav. And Esav will come and be subservient to him, and he'll hug him. This is the process that happened. We fought the war with an angel of death, and we almost lost, but we won. We were limping. We could hardly walk. 1/3 of our people gone. But we carried on building up and carried on. Today, Germany looks at us with respect. A few years ago, I remember there was a common exercise, Air Force exercise, with the German Air Force and the Israeli Air Force. And the Israeli Air Force beat the German Air Force. And I remember the pride of my late father. But this is the miracle. And it's amazing, every time that we fought the War of Independence, again, we had this negative backlash, and we grew, we got more parts of Israel. We had this threat of total annihilation just before the 6-Day War. People were telling those jokes of just desperation. The last person leaving Lod, that was the Ben Gurion airport, was called at the time, would please turn off the lights. And they were starting to turn parks into cemeteries because they were expecting so many people to be killed. And we had this most incredible victory. The land of Israel grew. This people, the belief, the emunah of people grew, and it didn't come without problems. We were limping. We're still limping. We're limping from the Holocaust. We're limping from the War of Independence. We're limping from the 6-Day War, and we're definitely limping from the Yom Kippur War. But we're limping and growing, and you can't compare the Israel of 1948, where there was hardly food, hardly spirituality, hardly technology, today where we are amongst the real leading people, leading countries in technology, in military force, in economy, and definitely more yeshivas and more people learning Torah today, whether it's actually inside the yeshivas or even Divrei Torah like this one, and many, many hundreds and thousands like them, like they've never been before. They have never in the history of the Jewish, in the history of the world, there have never been so many people learning Torah and this much Torah as today. Not in the times of the Gomorrah, not in the times of Eastern Europe, never. We're at the peak. And this is the son, this is the last son that's born. The last son that's born in Israel has to come here from Israel. And this is the son that's going to be Binyamin. And this is our strength. And we're going to keep growing and growing until eventually we'll become the spiritual leader. We don't want to overtake the world, but we want to bring goodness to the whole world and get rid of corruption in the whole world. But it's a painful process. It's even a painful process today. And some people will still call this progress Benoni, the son of my suffering. And then we'll have to look at Esav. And we'll look at the evil forces in the world. And the Torah will spell out the evil forces in the world. And the reason is that even amongst the evil forces of the world, there is good. Because there's nothing in this world that Hashem created that hasn't got an element of good. And the Midrash tells the story of how when Yaakov, in a few weeks' time, came to be buried in Israel, and Esav wanted to be buried in the Ma'aret HaMachpelah in Hebron. And the children of Yaakov said, no, Yaakov will be. And there was a fight, and in the pursuing fight, Esav's head was chopped off, and it rolled into the Ma'aret HaMachpelah. I don't know if this physically happened or didn't happen, but the idea there is that even in Esav, his body may have been extremely bad, his body may have been extremely negative, but his head, there was something positive in the spiritual side of the person that came from the womb of Rachel, or of Rivka, and from the seed of Yitzchak. There's something positive there. And in the end of the days, we'll be able to take even these negative sides and bring them close to again, bring them close to their source. Maybe this is hinted to into what's happening today. Agreements, peace agreements, very warm peace agreements that are being signed in the last few months between countries that were our enemies. United Emirates, Sudan, maybe Saudi Arabia, between Bahrain, suddenly we see that even in these countries, there's place for goodness. So we've seen that the story is not a pshat. It's not just a simple story of two brothers. We've seen one very deep explanation of how it goes into the individual. We've seen the other deep explanation of how it goes into the national site. And you could ask which one is right. And the answer is that both of them are right. Because that is how the world is built. As we said earlier, how Hashem built level, almost like an onion, level on level on level on level. And the DNA of the individual is the same DNA of the nation. It's the same DNA of the world. The saying that a person is a small world, or the world is a big person, is not just a saying. In Judaism, that's the way Hashem built us. That's why Hashem created us, mankind, but B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God. God hasn't got an image. God, by definition, has no image. But what this means is that Hashem created the way He manages the world in the same way as He manages the individual. And that is Tselem Elokim. Bezrat Hashem will be able to open our eyes, go from strength to strength, on a personal level, on a national level, on a universal level, and everybody do their bit to bring this world towards perfection. B'mihra b'yameinu. Shabbat Shalom.